It's so funky.
Today we have one of the world's foremost musicians, and I speak of someone who could be in the, if there was a big band. So for all of you out there who know what a big band is, he would be in the dream team or first team all time woodwind section. And that says enough just about his musicianship or his playing, but he's not just an amazing composer, but or arranger. He's prolific, and he would be on the dream team of all-time arrangers and composers for me. And I'm speaking of none other than the world class, the epitome of the saxophone or woodwinds, the great Ted Nash. And I'm really happy to have him here today. So welcome, Ted. Thank you.
Ali, I'm so glad to be here, man. Actually, it's really good to see you and connect with you. You know, I've missed you, seriously.
Man, I miss you too. It's been I know it's been some time. However, we're here now, so let's make the most of it.
Man, the first thing I want to say is that I was just listening to Chris Crenshaw's Prism, the music of the 50s. Do you remember that?
Okay. Vaguely, but yes.
You sound so good on that, man. You sound so good. It was his whole perspective, his whole take on the different types of styles of music that happened in the 50s, from cool jazz to Ornette. And you playing so good on it. You got to check it out. And there's a moment too where something happens and you laugh because the music is so good, and it was so great to hear your voice on the recording. I mean, you could actually hear your voice on your laugh. It was great.
Yeah, well, I'm glad something was good. At least the laugh was good. It was noticeable.
No, but check it out. You played. I mean, always. Yeah, you've always brought such great sound to that band. I mean, it's just there's no one who's been able to do what you do. So I miss you, bro.
Hey, man, thank you. I mean, that's a great honor coming from you. So I cherish that. Very, very indelible to the soul. I want to just, for our people out there, can you just give us a brief, relative background of your upbringing and how you got involved in music?
Well, I was very lucky. I don't think a lot of musicians had the opportunity to grow up in a household that were musicians. My father and my uncle, both very busy studio jazz musicians. They started out in the swing era, late swing era, and played with bands and traveled and toured and did all that, and then settled into the studios in Los Angeles and had incredible careers. And my mother was a great vocalist. We always kind of laughed that she may have been the most talented out of all of us, and yet she was the one who didn't go on to be a professional, just because she raised a family, and it was that time of 50s, 60s, when a lot of women didn't choose careers. But so just having that background of music around me, all around me, my brother, my sister, my uncle, my dad, my mom, people, friends, we had parties, people like Carmen McRae, and would come to the house, jam and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, I've always been comfortable with music. I wanted to be a classical clarinet player up until I was about 14 or 15, and then I heard Charlie Parker, and that was that. And so I did high school. We had a really good high school big band. We played festivals and did all that. And my teacher, Charlie Shoemake, had a really great system about teaching the jazz language. So I really delved into that during high school. So that was kind of how I got started, seeing the examples of my family, people who were happy doing what they did. And so that set a great example for me.
What was like a pivotal moment in your development? Like so obviously Charlie Parker was a huge influence in your direction, like artistically. And for those who don't know who Charlie Parker is, Charlie Parker, one of the most prolific artists to ever grace the face of the earth. So who like, let's say, like, who did you hang around with to like that propelled you deeper into the music, like in your maybe like high school years?
Yeah, so high school was that time, and of course we had an active big band, and we had some musicians that could play. My best friend, his name is Randy Kerber. He was a year older than me and a year ahead of me, always like ahead of me. So I was always busy catching up to him. You know, he had his stuff together, and but he wanted to be a studio musician. I wanted to be a jazz musician. So he stayed in L.A. and he became very busy, and I moved to New York and did the whole artist struggling thing. But there were definitely different moments in my high school, just during that time when I would go to clubs and hear, like there was a club called Dante's, and it was in North Hollywood, and I would go there 15, 16, 17, check out. I heard Warren Marsh there. Um, I heard a band with Bob Berg and Billy Higgins. It was Cedar Walton's band, a quartet, and I was like, man, the energy of this music, something that I'm not experiencing in Los Angeles, just that fire, that kind of passion that felt for me like a New York thing. So I would go and check those kind of bands out. And I moved to New York when I was 18, just because I was so turned on by the music that I heard. I heard cats like Dave Liebman, and I heard George Coleman, of course, and all these kind of players. And I was like, man, I got to get to New York. I had the opportunity of playing with some big bands. You mentioned big band, and it's funny because I have played with a zillion big bands, and I think as a horn player, it's easier to find a gig with a big band because there's
It used to be. And it's very important to point that out in today's time. So we're in 2020, it's April 17th, 2020,
yeah,
and we're talking about what, over 30 years ago.
yeah, for
So
sure.
so that part of our culture for our audience, it's not so prevalent now. It probably almost doesn't. It's a part of our culture that really doesn't exist. It doesn't have a social thing around it anymore. So people, sometimes younger people don't even know what a big band is.
And you know that statement Dizzy said about it, right? Don't consider it an achievement to let go of your traditional ensemble, your classic style ensemble, like a philharmonic orchestra, because uh, the big band is part of our tradition.
It's truly American. It is a part of our sound, and that's something that we can go into more later in our conversation. But however, continue on about all of your big band experiences. Maybe name a few of the big bands that you work with.
Yeah, so Louis Bellson, the drummer, he was probably the first band that I played regularly with. I did do a week with Lionel Hampton when I was 16. And that was like probably, I still don't know about a week of my life that I enjoyed more than that. You know, we went to Hawaii and we played in the same club every night with this big band with Lionel Hampton playing the vibes and just swinging and playing bebop. And I got to solo, just like, it was great. It was great. And then,
It didn't last long enough, right?
exactly. The week was over. I had sunburn and I went back to high school. Um, but I did have nice puka shells that I bought on the beach. But there was Don Ellis, who I was in the band. I was in his band when I was 17, and he passed away while I was still in the band when I was 17. And he was known for writing all these crazy odd time signatures. Like for people who don't know, like a lot of music is feels like you can just kind of tap along with it. But his music, like dot 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 dot, it was like a lot of odd time signatures, like in 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, like not danceable kinds of music. And it was a challenge. And that was one of the bands that I played with, and Toshiko Akiyoshi's big band. So those were kind of the three bands that I played with while I was still in high school before I moved to New York. And it was a training. I mean, because we played with Jazz Lincoln Center for how many years together? I mean,
12, 13,
right?
like that. Yeah.
Playing in a big band is not, it's something that you have to understand how to do. And it's just like I remember talking with you, because you come from that small band tradition of swinging in quintets and quartets, septets, whatever. And the
Right.
idea of playing in a big band feels kind of stifling. And I remember having that conversation with you as you came into the band, like, okay, big band. But I mean, you just fell into that thing and made the band feel so good. It's something, right? It's a training ground for a lot of things.
Well, I mean, I feel like it's more about being a musician. Like people ask me quite often, they were like, "Wow, you're a great big band drummer," or you're small. It's like, no, I'm actually not even a drummer. I'm a musician first.
Yeah.
If you take the perspective of being a musician and being in service to the music, then your perspective is more global. So you do what's necessary for the environment. So it transcends everything. And probably the most important mantra, my mantra always is listening. So to be a great speaker, you have to be able to listen.
Right.
Back to me listening to you.
If you don't listen, there's just no way you're going to be part of something, whatever.
And, they always say that God created humans with 2 ears and 1 mouth to listen twice as much as you speak.
I like that. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
Got it.
Yeah, that's good, man. I like that.
So give me maybe one story or an anecdote of like maybe a couple, or if you want, like a early road story, and then maybe a later one, or whatever you want. But I think that's always important.
Yeah. No, but it's, that, like I mentioned, that club, it was such a training ground, and also just the hub of a lot of great musicians in Los Angeles. And it would be like serious, committed jazz musicians, studio musicians, pop people, whatever, who would come in and hang. And they would just come in to hang. Sometimes I would play there when I was 16, whatever. Yeah, 16, I remember playing there with my teacher's band. He had a quintet. So he started asking me to play with him, which was a complete honor because I replaced his saxophone player, Pete Chrisley, who a lot of people don't know his name, but he's on some recordings with Steely Dan, with Natalie Cole, Unforgettable. That remake she did with her father. A lot of people know that recording, and that's him playing the tenor solo. But he had the most beautiful sound and technique, and I just loved him so much. So to replace him in my teacher's band was such an honor. And we used to play that club about maybe every other month, or maybe once a month. It depends. It was like a regular gig. So there'd always be people hanging out, some famous people like Artie Shaw, a clarinet player, would come in or whatever. But what always happened is my mom, we would get home, my parents, of course, always came, and they would say, man, it was great. Al Jarreau came. Al Jarreau, he was there. Oh, man, she goes, really? I thought you would talk to him. And I said, man, no, but could you please tell me? Because Al Jarreau was just, especially in the late 70s, was really, great jazz singer, sort of a little bit in the style of Bobby McFerrin and that, like a lot of sounds, but he's starting to cross over into pop, and he's becoming really popular. But I loved him. And so every time I would play there, now this was going on, there would be this cat that I would always see at the bar, right? Like some, like a local cat hanging out at the bar, not so dressed like whatever. And he'd come up to me on a break or something, goes, yeah, Ted, man, you sound good, man. I'd be like, thanks. Yeah, what's your name again? He'd go, Al. I'd be like, oh, cool, Al. Yeah, man, all right, So I didn't know that was Al Jarreau. I just thought it was some local cat hanging out. So for like about 3 months, my mom was like, oh, Al Jarreau was there. And I was like, man, I wish someone would, tell me. So Cedar.
The naivety when you're just not even tuned in, right? I love it.
Naive as you can be. And so Cedar Walton's band was playing at the Vanguard, and I dragged a friend of mine down from high school, trumpet player in the big band in high school. And so we're checking out, the band, a quartet, swinging. So riveted. And my friend's sitting there, and I look over and I see this guy, Al, coming over. And I'm like, oh, yeah, cool, Al, the local cat, whatever, that I see. And so I turn away and I'm checking out the band again. And my friend, after Al walks by, my friend taps me on the shoulder and says, yo, man, did you just see who walked by? That was Al Jarreau. I was like, and I put it all together, right? So by the time Al comes back from the bathroom, now I'm paying attention, and he walks by and he sees me and he goes, hey, Ted, how you doing, man? And so my friend is like, what? You know Al Jarreau? I was like, yeah, man, But I'll tell you about another story. We just lost somebody that he may not be a household name with a lot of your listeners, but his name was Lee Konitz.
Wow.
Did you know that he passed?
I didn't know.
Was recently, like yesterday, before yesterday, or something.
Oh, wow.
And we've had a chance to play with him. I mean, I know you've probably played with him in different situations, but he was a guest with the Dazzling Center Orchestra. So I've been thinking a lot about Lee, just what an amazing alto saxophonist and an innovator. He played with Miles Davis. He came out of the bebop era, but had his own thing. And I was thinking about when I moved to New York, I was probably 19, maybe 20, but around 1980. And I was playing this club that isn't there anymore, called Bechet's. And so I was playing. I had Kenny Barron on piano and a guy named Mike Fleming playing bass. And
Wow.
I was just a punk, you know. I had just released a record and I was like, yeah, New York, here I am. So I'm playing, and on a break, this guy comes up to me. He's got kind of unkempt hair, you know, slightly graying. And he goes, yeah, I thought I was going to see a different Ted Nash. And I was like, oh, you probably mean my uncle Ted Nash. He goes, yeah, that's probably him, the guy who played with Les Brown. I walked all the way across Central Park to hear him play. Like, well, sorry, I'm a different Ted Nash. It was my uncle he wanted to hear. Anyway, but that started a friendship with Lee and me, and you know, over the next 30 years, I've had a chance to hear him play, and like with you, play with him, and what a great cat.
That's amazing. I mean, these stories, they live and they have such influence. It's really interesting in our time, in this time of coronavirus, where people are, you know, we're removed from actual physical connection and connection. So technology is providing us this opportunity to interface. However, it's definitely not the same being in the room with people.
Yeah.
So you know, all of these stories that you share show the human quality, and ultimately for artists and musicians, especially for musicians, is that connection, the physical and all of the nuance in human connection and playing. And you know, there's technologies out now where people can jam together. It's like, man, it will never be the same of somebody being in the same room with someone, because there's so much electromagnetic energy and so much stuff that's in the ethos when you're in
With you on
space.
that.
Yeah, it's just you can't substitute it. You know, so I just wanted to throw that in there as a you know, an added perspective to these human experiences. I wanted to move along and just maybe you could give some perspective on how you practice. You know, you know, what can you give our viewers, listeners a perspective on, like what's the most important thing to focus on in practice? Like if it's just one or two things.
I think, you know, I always talk about, I don't know, you know, some of your listeners probably aren't musicians and many of them probably are. So, but I always think about how there are four distinct areas that we all have to work on to become improvisers. Um, at the center, I kind of think of it like the four corners of improvisation. At the center of it is rhythm, because rhythm is kind of everything, right? Everything's connected to rhythm. But you've got technical ability, you've got harmonic understanding, um, you've got expression, and then ideas and thought. So all of these things come together. And if you've got a good balance of those things, then you pretty much can play. Because we're not just trying to play a bunch of technique. We're not just trying to play a bunch of fast notes, because people misunderstand what technique is. We need to practice and be agile and be able to play, but the technique is to be able to play the ideas and the thoughts that we are thinking and feeling. And that we have to have the harmonic knowledge to be able to do that as well. And I think one of the most important things, besides like working on technique, which we might do by running scales or patterns, and getting, you know, accomplished in different areas of our horn, whatever. The main thing for me is like, it's kind of a battle, and I think for younger people especially, is making this an extension of us or part of us, not something that's outside of us. Like if we think of this as that's where the music is happening, that's not it. The music is happening here, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I know when you play the drums, it's not like, okay, I'm going to hit this cymbal. Now I got to hit the bass drum. Now I got, it's just you. And then all that stuff happens naturally as an extension of how you feel.
I mean, I remember there was a moment, and I want to share this little anecdote along with your perspective. We were going to, I want to say Germany or somewhere, and all of our instruments didn't show up to the gig. And
I remember that.
and
Poland maybe or somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, and so we had a concert that night, and no one really had their horns, and you guys had to borrow other people's horns, like whoever, like all of your doubles and all of that stuff was just not there.
Yeah.
And I remember guys were making jokes because they say, "Man, y'all sound better with the substitute instrument than your own because your actual real personality comes through the instrument." And I remember there was another thing where cats in the trumpet section were playing student model horns at a workshop, and I can remember Marcus Printup sounding. It doesn't matter what trumpet he plays. His sound is so unique. It comes through whatever the instrument is.
Yeah.
And I would say that the same for drums.
It's true.
It just doesn't matter. Like, okay, maybe the quality of the sound is a little different, but however, the intention is always the same. So like,
And you're right. That's like it's like kind of overcoming the mechanical or this thing which is not. I mean, we practice and practice and practice so that it's no longer something that we're thinking so much about. That's for me. That's what it is. If you're thinking too much about it, right? I mean, like just the main thing about connecting with it on a level that's sort of intimate, feeling the instrument and what the sound is like, you know. Like for me, that feels better than trying to play a bunch of scales. Like I just want to connect with it and try to make a melody. You know, there are things that I know about my own playing that I struggle with sometimes. Like maybe I don't have the technique to do certain things because I'm not a super like practicing fast licks all the time and doing all of that. And I've developed
techniques.
what? Hot licks.
Techniques.
Yeah. And sometimes playing fast tempos is hard for me, especially if I'm not near the drums or something, because I have trouble kind of defining the time if I'm far away. And we struggle with that in the big band all the time. So there's things that I know that I need to kind of work on. But for me, the most important thing is just to really connect with the sound of the horn and try to make it as personal as possible. The kind of players that we like to listen to are not necessarily, but they're people who, like Miles Davis, or just people like Coleman Hawkins, and people who can just be themselves and you feel their personality through the horn. Or the
That brings me to the next question is like, how do you develop the taste to know what is good and what is not good? Because I feel like, and how did you do that?
Well, that's interesting because good and bad, they're judgmental and they're objective, and I think that's one of the things that makes it hard for young people because they're judging themselves all the time, right? So what's good and what's not good can be replaced by a choice. Why did I make that choice? Like why in that moment did I play too many notes? Or why in that moment did I whatever lose the connection because I wasn't listening? I mean, that's another thing, right? That might be the main thing. Or I didn't trust myself, or I didn't trust the other musicians. Like if I play something and I'm not sure that you're going to respond to me, I might just keep playing and not let you have a chance to respond. But if I say, I know Ollie Jackson, I know, I mean, and I do know that you're always going to be there. You're always listening. You're always going to respond. So I could leave some space, then you will pick it up and hand it back to me. So I could listen to a tape and say, man, I wasn't good. Or I could say, I didn't trust myself, or I didn't trust you. And that's why it didn't have the highest musical expression that it could have. So that's becoming mature. For me, that's part of the maturity. Right?
Wow. Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
It's always, you hear this all the time. And when you're a younger musician, you hear it from older musicians. And they always say less is more. And you don't really understand what that means. However, like for jazz music, what makes really great solos, this is for me, and it might be different for you. Someone like Miles Davis, Lester Young, Sweets Edison. I'm bringing up musicians that were masters of space. So they would play a phrase. However, And something Miles Davis really realized is like the rhythm section is doing all of the work.
Right.
Uh, I mean, if they're swinging and grooving and creative, you all have to do is colorize. It's like you just touch the painting up. You're just touching it up. You don't actually have to do a lot. That's the genius. Same with Prez. He'll play one phrase and then it's just the space speaks.
And as a drummer, don't you wish that more horn players, for example, did play a little more colorfully or less notey, you know?
Yeah, well, it's all perspective, and people think about, like, let's say we'll take John Coltrane for example, because his music had a hell of a lot of energy, uh, and it was very like transitive. You know, they could just vamp on something, and it's like waves, like an ocean or a current. It's constantly just moving and churning.
Hmm.
The power in John Coltrane's music, even though he played some amazing harmony and notes and you can be technical and cerebral, the core and the essence of his of what makes the music powerful is his sound and his use of being inside of that churning spirit of the music. So you could play all of the notes, but it doesn't have the same meaning. Train's the core of his stuff was his sound ultimately, and that's any great musician. It's their sound. So if you don't have,
You're totally right. And that's everything. And the sound, and I remember Wynton Marsalis, where we were listening to somebody or talking about how somebody was playing too many notes, and he goes, "Here's the thing, man. People think that if you copy Coltrane's all his notes, man, and then you're getting it, you're copying his thing." But he said people always forget about the spirituality behind his music. So I tell students, it's one thing to transcribe all the notes and then play them, but the other thing is to try to transcribe the feeling around the music. And so I've started to push my students, instead of just trying to get all the exact notes and phrases, copy the environment that the musician has created. Like, so you put on a record with Sonny Rollins, and now if he plays a short phrase, you just play a short phrase. If he plays a long phrase, you play a long phrase. If he leaves space, you leave space. If he plays a tritone substitution or something technical, you do that. So what you do is you're training yourself to have the same kind of maturity that a player like that has. Like, think about it, right? I mean, just think about what these musicians are giving us. And remember the concert we did with, were you on the one we did with Ornette Coleman and Dewey Redman, or was that before you joined the band?
I think that's right before I joined the orchestra, like maybe like a few
2004,
months
maybe.
before. Yeah,
It was like right before you came in, because I remember we
I actually went to one of those performances, so I was technically in the house.
well, you were always part of our situation, even before you joined the band. But I remember that was the one that Dewey Redman, great tenor saxo player, was the guest. But Ornette Coleman came to one of our rehearsals, which freaked me out because I had done two arrangements of his music. I
Yeah,
didn't know he was,
two marvelous, masterful arrangements, by the way. But go ahead.
well,
People understand. Yeah, go.
one was that, like, Wynton gave me those songs, he said, but do these two. And one was Kaleidoscope, that really crazy one, right?
Right.
So, worked on it, transcribed it, tried to create a whole thing. And then Ornette was at the rehearsal and he had just heard us rehearse those two charts. And then we took a lunch break, right? So he's sitting there, and I had never met him before. So I went up and I said, "Hey, Mr. Coleman, it's such an honor. I'm such a fan," and all that. He just, man, you can transcribe notes, but you can't transcribe an environment. And that was it. That's the only conversation I had with him. And I thought about that for years. And that's now why I push kids or students to try to transcribe an environment, not just the notes. It's like it came back to me years later as something that I could actually understand.
Well, that is the most substantive perspective that you could take because I mean, just recently I've been studying. I'm working on composing a cello quartet with drums.
And I haven't checked it out yet because we had all this
No,
stuff the last
no,
couple of
no,
days.
no
Can't
worries.
wait to check it out, bro.
But I was studying. I pulled out some Beethoven, his complete string quartets. I mean, and just looking at the scores and just studying. I mean, there's no way. And this is what people sometimes don't really understand. We know Beethoven's name or Bach, J.S. Bach. It's like, oh yeah, Bach, Beethoven. As you just say, that's like, man, when you go into their work and you start looking at those scores, you go like, bro, this is from another planet. They might have been aliens. Because, yeah, because the level of detail and complexity and amount of time that they had, and that, so it's an environment, and that's what we forget. So to compose or to write or to hear like that, you're in a different environment. It's a different world. It's truly a different world. So you can't even apply. It's like, how is that, to even apply that level of logic or knowledge to, it's like, it's a completely different world. So sometimes you can beat yourself up for not like why am I not getting this? But sometimes it's because maybe you're not supposed to get it. But the thing, it doesn't stop you from the intention of what it is or the search. So kind of in line with what you're saying about the environment is to capture that. And then definitely in my musical journey, it was always about capturing the essence of what something is about, not necessarily all of the technical detail, especially with rhythm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another a no whole other thing. But let's.
Was the Beethoven late
Oh man,
quartets?
yeah, like opus. Would you say the late quartet, string quartets? Yeah, like opus
Yeah.
133.
Yeah, I don't remember the numbers, but I just know
Grosse fugue, or like his the fugue is just, man. I mean, it's like, I mean, where does this come from? I mean, I could sit there for like 2 months and just study that, just like, I mean, you can study it, but the deep thing about it is what I'm learning is he heard that. That's
right.
what he heard. So once and this is for our listeners, once I get into a mode just for me and arranging or composing, you can't use formulas sometimes. So no matter, and it's something that I've heard I've heard you say it, I've heard Vincent Gardner and anyone that I really love, their writing or their compositional perspective, it always goes to what you hear. And when you hear it, it's authentic and it's sincere and you can't replace it. And it doesn't, it's like Monk's music. He heard that. It wasn't like there's a formula. You can't look at it and be like, that's the way he heard. Or Train or anyone great or, Coleman Hawkins. That's the way they hear. So the genius is in you being able to have a voice, but there is a construct. You develop it over time. However, it's individual to you. It's like when I hear you play, like I can hear you from like whatever instrument, be like, oh yeah, that's Ted, because that's the way you hear. That's.
Does anybody ever ask you, how do I develop my sound, my personal style? People will say that and develop a style. That's not what you do. You listen to everybody before you and you emulate them and you copy them, and eventually your own sound and style comes out of all of that. So, I'd say that because
And
people don't trust that will happen.
yeah, it's the more information. I'm from the school of the more information you put in, the more of an archive or library you have to pull from. So the more music you learn, or the more music you study, and I don't, for people that are studying music or newbies, when I mean study, it doesn't mean just check out the stuff you like. I said true study comes from you checking out and really learning something you don't like.
Right.
Something you don't like, and then you check it out, and then you really study it, and then tell me why you don't like it after you spend a lot of time checking it out and studying it. Then I said, then there's respect. Then if you still don't like it, then there's some valid reasons why. But that's the investigation on our own personal development, is checking out things you actually don't like or have an interest in, and then form of perspective, your own.
You know, there's a bass player who's in his 50s now that I've played with for 30 years maybe, who he went to NYU. That's where he got his sort of jazz degree or whatever, you know, when he was young. And I met him just when he graduated NYU. I said, "Oh man, so you know, what did you learn at school?" He goes, "I pretty much learned everything I don't want to do." You know, he says he pretty much learned all the stuff he doesn't want to do, you know, because that's what they were teaching him, and he found his own voice and his own way of playing. And I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective.
I hope he didn't have to pay for it in an economic sense. Well, he paid with his time, but I hope economically it wasn't too painful.
Yeah. Uh,
um,
uh, no, I mean, you know, there's ways of. I know when I was younger, and I knew a lot of musicians who would go to a club and they would just dog somebody, rag on them, like say, "Man, this cat can't play," or "Man," and you when you're around enough people who talk like that, you kind of you can fall into that and be like just looking at everybody for how horrible they are or what they're not doing right or what they're but you can always, like you just said, man, you can look at everything and say, okay, and you learn from it. I remember once Wynton Marsalis and I were at the Village Vanguard checking out a pretty famous trumpet player, and I knew he didn't really care for him that much. So I was kind of I thought he was going to say, man, you know, he was like, it was interesting how he took that little phrase and he kind of built on it. You know, he kept finding positive things to say about the choices that he was making. And I thought that was so beautiful because you can always find positivity in everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I learned more from all of the SAG gigs I played in my life than I did actually. I mean, it's different experiences, but
Yeah.
I always try to encourage, I mean, just for myself personally, is to go into every musical situation or just in life, any life situation. What can I bring to this to make it better?
Yeah.
What can I do to improve this situation? Sometimes it's not doing more, sometimes it's doing less.
Right.
Like if I went into, a college big band or, an amateur big band and expecting them to sound like Jazz Lincoln Center, I mean, I'm just setting myself up for,
Expectation.
yeah, well, I'm just setting myself up to be disappointed. And that's what people do. It's like, or if I'm playing with 5-year-olds, like in like with kazoos and little instruments, I'm there to have a good time and to bring the joy of playing together and music and having human connection. Because ultimately, that's what the music is about. Now, there's different levels. That's what people there. I feel like the hierarchy and explanation and people's understanding of what makes somebody legitimately, and I hate to use the word great because I don't like great, everyone's great, but exceptional or amazing musician, those qualities and attributes, like an NBA ball player. What makes somebody like the worst guy in the NBA will destroy like anyone. The
Amateur.
guy, yeah, the bench, the guy on the bench that never plays will destroy anyone. Like you don't even have this, like you're not. That's what people don't understand. It's the same for a really great world class musician, such as yourself. It's like, yeah, you pick up an instrument and it's transcending the notes. Like, can you read the notes? Yeah, but what can you bring to the notes? What can you play that makes these notes alive or brings a personality and a character? That's what great musicians can do
Yeah.
on anything. It doesn't matter. It transcends style. It's like, oh, you just play jazz. It's like, man, you can play country music. You can play EDM, like whatever the genre or style. A great musician can assimilate and bring something that uplifts it and takes it to another level. And I feel like that's not communicated well in our culture.
I think you're right. And I think that especially in school and teaching, I it probably is happening in some places, but there's more sort of emphasis on technique and abilities and things like that rather than on expression. I know that when I hear like advanced high schools playing, for example, uh, Arlington is a great example because we're hearing the top 15 bands in the country, playing, and they play at a very professional level. Like on the first, listen, you're like, oh wow, these sound professional, and then you realize there's that 90% of what you develop as a kid, right? Up until like that extra 10% that you work the rest of your life to get together. And I think that is where we leave just the idea of wanting to impress people with all of our technique and all that, to a desire to move people and to change their lives somehow from the music. And I think once we understand that music gives us this great opportunity, especially jazz, to move somebody because of the personal nature of it and the human connection, like you're talking about, I think once we discover that, then we understand what it is, why we're doing this.
And absolutely.
Yeah.
You chase that other element. Most listeners are not that invested. I call it invested listening. It's like we watch sports. To appreciate sports, you got to know the rules, right? Just on a fundamental level. Then you can start to get into more of the nuances. But that's a part of our culture. With listening to music, it's always seemed like this individual thing and it's subjective. Well, this is what I like. Like food. Well, I like this kind of food or that. But what are you exposed to? You only know what you know. You can't know what you don't know.
Right.
And that's the story of life. Like the more we live, the more if you're interested, you could be 60 years old and be in a cocoon and only check out the little stuff that you like. And I feel now in our culture, because of social media and because of AI, and that's artificial intelligence, people only have to interface with what they like, and they're being served on a platter only the things that they like. So
look at how everything's listening to you, whether it's your phone or Alexa or your computer. Now they know what your interests are, and they just keep feeding you the same things. Oh, you're looking at this. Well, here's another example of what, could be an ad or it could be something, but it's just like, oh, do we need that? We need someone to say, hey, you've been checking this out.
you check something I like it maybe in the opposite direction. Like check out the opposite of what you're constantly checking, because it's a way of control. Because if you keep people in there, then they're afraid of venturing outside of whatever it is that they know. And I could go into many things just about you and how diverse your musical palette is. From people think of Ornette Coleman. So for those who don't know Ornette Coleman's work, you should definitely check it out. And Ted, you have over 14 albums as a leader. And as a band leader, as someone that also plays in ensembles, or as a sideman, as a producer, many aspects. One thing I really want to focus on, and for our listeners, is that you are extremely, one of the world's great arrangers, composers, large ensembles. I want to talk a little bit about, or for you to talk a little bit about, some of the elements of your arranging style, for example, or how you look at like a landscape of arranging. Let's say it's for a large ensemble, for a big band. What do you like? How would you think about it, like in your outline or your perspective? Please, elaborate on
Large band.
a large band. Yes.
It's a good question, and I sometimes I struggle actually when someone wants to study arranging, because I'm not sure I know how to teach it, because I find it to be very personal, and no one has ever really taught me arranging. I mean, it's like you. It's like when you brought in your first charts to Jazz Lincoln Center, it's not like you were studying in school. I mean, you just said, I can hear all this stuff. Let me see how I can put all that together. I know what these musicians sound like. Let me see if I can figure out a way to put their voice into this chart. And you wrote some, great charts while you were in the band, and developed your writing too. And so I feel blessed that I have that opportunity, like we all do in the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra. We have now 11 people who've orchestrated for the band, including you and everybody. And for me, it's like you get like we were talking about before, you get all these tools, you understand harmony, you understand ranges of instruments, you understand overtones and how notes coming together vibrate a certain kind of way. These are things that you learn over the years from playing and listening to music. And then you set out to write something, and it's like, okay, now what am I going to write? Well, first of all, you have to have some kind of vision for what the thing is supposed to do, right? I mean, you have to feel like, is this going to be a powerful swinging thing, or is this going to be something more introspective or whatever? So you have these sort of guidelines that you have. Now you've got this palette. I love that word because you have all these colors and you can choose which to bring to for that. And it's really hard to talk about it technically. You understand all of this stuff, the harmony, how to put chords together. But now each chart that you do has to be dealing with a certain function and emotion and an objective. The great actress Glenn Close, who you know, and we've worked with before, I asked her once about how she approaches her roles because she's such a great actress. I was like, what's your technique? Because, I don't really have a technique. I just use my imagination. And I was kind of like, okay, simple answer. And like that thing that Ornette Coleman told me, that little tidbit was like, okay, I just let it. And I realized that imagination is kind of everything, right? So now when I sit and write, I try to imagine where this music is supposed to go. Like what's the life of this thing? And can I imagine where it can go? And if I can imagine it, then I can make the choices to try to fulfill that. So a lot of times my writing is closing my eyes, laying down on a couch or something, and just like listening to what I've already written, having it going through my head, and then imagining where that's supposed to go now. Then we know the musicians we're writing for. So I know if I want like a plunger thing, I could put Kenny on it or print up. If I know if I want something kind of fast and exciting, I might put Elliot on a trombone. If I want it to be really soulful, I could put Chris Crench on, that kind of thing. So you have to know the musicians that you're writing for as well. And that feeds into the imagination that you have. I mean, it's hard to talk about it technically, really, so personal. Right?
That's great. It's great. I think that even though you're talking in in the context of how you think about it globally, there's still a lot of technical things, and this is the thing that I always point out, and something that I developed and had to learn or work really hard on. So your use of, because you play the woodwinds and you play all of them, I'm like from piccolo all the way down. You got a bass saxophone there. You dig?
I haven't been playing.
The writing it's written very well for the instruments, because every instrument has a range. This is for people that don't really know about music, and they have a color and a character to the sound itself, the instrument, and then they blend in different places in different range. Certain instruments speak, and they have like their let's just say the heart of the instrument, or the meaty, the sweet spot of every instrument. So I always notice that all of like Ted's music or his writing, it's very, how can I say, the instruments speak, or the keys that you choose, all of those little technical things have an impact on how an arrangement will sound. And this is something for our listeners to it's more technical, but it's very important. And it's something that you learn as you go in time. What works, what doesn't work, and sometimes trial and error. And sometimes you stumble on things that you thought might not work, but do work. And depending on who plays them, like sometimes I want to point out one arrangement, and I don't know if it's out there for people to follow, but it's the Rise Up Shepherd arrangement that you did a few years back. That is one of the most brilliant arrangements. It's just brilliant. Because sometimes it's the concept, it's the use of the color palette that you have. And I play that arrangement for so many people, you'd be amazed. It's like one of my favorites. It's one of my Ted Nash favorites. It's in my top 10.
I'll tell you something funny about that. Sherman Irby was the musical director of that program. and he said, "Hey man, I want you to write like a thing that really features like the saxophones and like some." And I don't know. I just ended up. I didn't follow his directions all that much, and I wrote him. I said, "Hey man, I think this thing went in a completely different direction than you wanted." And he goes, "Okay, man." He was kind of. I could tell he was like he's trying to pace the concert, but at the end of the piece, it's interesting because we assimilate all of this stuff that we listen, like you say, we have to listen to a lot of different stuff. And I know that arrangement because I listened to it recently because I think we put it out or something recently. But I worked with a great classical composer named John Adams. And he wrote Nixon in China. He wrote a lot of great pieces. He's a kind of a new age, sort of somewhat surrealistic, known for like a modern classical style, but he did a keynote address at a Juilliard, I think, a few years ago, and he said his favorite composer was Duke Ellington, which I thought was really deep. And but when I got to the end of that arrangement you're talking about, I started to hear how he took, like, if you listen to Nixon in China, his opera, it's long, it's 3 hours long, but there's some stuff that he did in there where he played with stuff staying the same and then stuff changing at the same time, so you're creating these different kinds of tensions and stuff. And I was messing with that because I wanted to try to get that thing that he does so well, which is so playful in the harmony yet with the rhythm, and so I was messing with that. So like I feel like that was really influenced by a particular person. But thanks for pointing that out because I thought about that.
Brilliant. I want to shift gears a little bit. I'd like to get some of your perspectives. Just call this section of our conversation worldview. So, give me just for artists and musicians, give me your perspective on the New York City jazz scene currently, like 2020. Well, pre-coronavirus 2020.
Yeah, right. Which we'll hopefully go back to post coronavirus.
What? No gigs still.
I mean, that's the thing. Here, and part of that is that, like when I moved to New York, I was 18. I felt like clubs were just filled with people. You walk down the 7th Avenue, and there was 7th Avenue South and Sweet Basil and the Village Vanguard and Angry Squire. Like you could see all these clubs in one walk. And it's still kind of like that. But when I got there, of course, the people then were talking about, oh man, the 50s and 60s in this town. And now people today are talking about the 70s. I mean, you should have been here in the 70s, and in 2030, they'll be saying, man, you should have been here in the early 2000s, man. But what I feel, there's a difference, I think. New York has always been sort of the center, the hub of the intensity of jazz music. And that's what drew me to New York from Los Angeles, which is another big city for music. And I think a lot of people like you came from Detroit. People come from a lot of cities that have their own kind of soul and scene because you knew you wanted to be around serious musicians. And that was where the biggest collection of serious jazz musicians lived and played regularly. And I think as people get older, they might move back home, or they might go to take a teaching job somewhere, or just be part-time in New York, or just move out of the city and not come in the city that often. But there's that excitement and intensity about people who get out of school in their 20s and they come to the city. And that's what feeds the ongoing development of this music, is this buzz of young people in the city. And they have a respect for older people. It's like, you don't even like, wait, are you 50?
No. Well, let's see. Still on the early half of 40s. Yeah.
I just assume you're older because I've known you for so long, but you were like 12 when you started hanging out with us. You're still a youngster, man. But you've already become a veteran. It's like you've been out here long enough that the young people coming up are like, Ali Jackson, man. I have him on this record. I have him on this record, and it's interesting when you cross over to that, right? And I don't know when that happened, but suddenly now I'm looking at these younger people, and they're looking at the people of my generation and earlier into your generation as the kind of the people who've been around, the people that they look up to. And that's strange because when I moved to New York, I was 18 and I would go hear Phil Woods, or I'd go hear George Coleman, or I'd go hear whoever. and they're gone. You know, a lot of them are gone now. But New York, I think, will always have that. For me, I struggle a little bit with the fact that there seems to be a lot more musicians than there were, like especially coming out of school. School seems to be spitting out a lot more musicians who have a basic understanding about how to play, but there's not as many places to play. And I struggle a little bit with that. Like, it kind of makes me feel torn about how much to get involved with education in terms of like, do we need to create another 2,000 musicians this year to come on the scene? But ultimately it comes down to yes, we do, because this is an important art form and it's just keeping it going. And I just wish there were more opportunities. I think New York will always be a place where people can play jam sessions and all of that, but it does feel different to me than it did 30 years ago. It does.
And I mean, can you elaborate on what those factors are? Like why, like, top three factors of why, what has changed so much in New York City in the last, almost 30 something years for you, 35 years, something like that?
Yeah, I moved here 40 years ago. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I've been in New York 42 years.
Well, I mean, I have a perspective. However, I'm more interested in your perspective because you've obviously been in New York City longer than me, and you were more in the heart of, or closer to the golden era of so many really great and legendary musicians. And I feel like it's shifted, but I'd like to hear like why. What are those components of why you think it has shifted?
I think the music itself, jazz, has kind of splintered off a lot too. I mean, I think that a lot of young people are listening to. There's so much available always. We're talking about the internet and all this. I think people are aren't exposed to jazz enough when they're younger, and I think there's less. I mean, economically, I think there's a big thing to talk about there because I think people struggle to earn a living as a jazz musician, and I think the rents in New York have gone up, and jazz clubs can't pay people, well to play. It's always you play for the door, and I just feel like there isn't enough there isn't enough money behind this music. Like there isn't enough support for it, and I think a lot of musicians struggle with, can I even stay in the city? And so a lot of people move back home or stay home when they get out of school. That's not a bad thing necessarily, because I love the idea of having uh, good musicians in all the cities rather than it being so polarized like it was when I moved to New York. You were either in LA or Chicago or New York or somewhere. Now I feel like you go to a place, you go to Chapel Hill and there's like a jam session. You go to whatever, different places around the country, the world. But for me, it's hard because I might have this perspective because I've been there for so long, but a young person who comes there might look at it and say, wow, there's so much going on. So maybe my perspective isn't that great because I'm no longer the person who's going to the jam sessions and finding all the places, all the late night club hangs and all that kind of, I'm no longer that person. Not that I don't go to clubs and hear music, but it's a different energy for me. So I think my perspective of what's happening in New York is probably skewed a little with the fact that I'm older and that I've had different kinds of experiences. And I do get a vicarious thrill sometimes of seeing these young kids in their early 20s come into the city and all the stuff they get to hear and learn. And so I'm not sure my perspective is that intelligent, really, like in terms of
Well,
what's actually happening.
well, I want you to elaborate on the difference between how you learn the music and the whole
Right.
college
Well, okay.
as education experience.
Well, that's a great question because when I was 18, there were only like three or four schools to go to. There was Berkeley, there was North Texas State, there was, you could go to Manhattan School or Juilliard, but that was for classical music. Then there was a school in California, Cal State University Northridge, I was going to go to near me. And then I went to New York instead, and that was my school. So New York City was my school, right? And now you've got the new school, you've got NYU, you've got Manhattan School, you've got Juilliard, you've got Queens College, you've got Patterson, You've got all these schools teaching jazz programs that attract people to New York, which I think is amazing. But it almost doesn't feel like real life. You're still prolonging your kind of high school safety net when you're in school. And I don't think people like Hank Mobley, went to college. They just came on the scene. So, and I had not an argument, kind of a discussion with a trumpet player named Dave Douglas, and we were at the IAJE a few years ago, and I ran into him, and I was saying, man, I don't know, but education is tough for me because I think the players who really have the passion, who need to play and will play, they find it on their own. They're not told how to do it. He goes, yeah, but what about Hank Mobley? What if he had school? Maybe he would have found some other things that he didn't find. And I'm like, that's a good point. So school is important, but you also got to be.
He would have found out it's stupid to be a musician and would have stopped and
That's
think
right.
like been an engineer.
You would have been a chemical engineer or something.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, what about you? I mean, you've probably been a little bit in school, right? But you pretty much just play. You were a teenager playing, and
I mean, I'm a rare one. I actually finished an undergraduate degree. I had a scholarship to go to the new school. I mean, I had scholarships for other things actually. I was really good in math. I had a full ride math scholarship. I had a few other scholarships, a lot of classical scholarships.
you did a lot of percussion stuff too, right?
Percussion, yeah, classical percussion. Because there were really no, even for me and my vintage, there weren't a lot of jazz programs. There were some, like the new school was still new. It was a new program, and that was one of the best ones, I guess, out there. You had Berkeley, the new school, maybe Oberlin. They had a little bit of a mixed classical jazz program. But I'll be honest. I mean, I did the degree basically for my family, for to get an undergraduate degree,
Gotcha.
and I stuck. I mean, man, the first 2 months I was in New York, man, I got called to go on tour. I went on tour with Bill Saxton, and then I had to tour my uncle Oliver Jackson, who brought us, youngsters out there. So I was like on the road for like 7 weeks, right? Going into school. And then right after that, I was fortunate to work with a lot of other great musicians, and including like I was asked to join Wynton Marsalis's small group, like second year in school. So for me to just have the focus to finish, so I finished a 4-year program, like 5 years. I think I took a semester or so off, but I was able to still, and that was kind of the bottom of the program, to be able to get professional development or get credit for touring, or for them to bridge the gap between you getting professional experience and doing it. So fortunately for me, I was able to get an undergraduate degree. However, in this day and age, the real true education is doing it and being a part of, or apprenticeship. And so my perspective on it, if you really want to be about playing, you have to play. And you have to be around the greatest musician you can be around to apprentice and learn from them. And I feel like that's been the culture of jazz music, period. That is the school.
It is. That's the school. That's it. And it will always continue to be. And even though we have more advanced education departments at schools and stuff, I mean, that's it. You got to get out there. You got to get it there. And if you don't have the opportunity to play, you got to go out and just hang and be around the cats.
Well, I mean, the whole, I mean, I have a feeling, I mean, I'll just say it, the whole jazz education thing, it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's a complete fraud, because I mean, there's something that you can learn, but if you're paying upwards of $25,000-$30,000 a year to go to school, to do something, to learn something that you can't get a job in after, I say you shouldn't have a program. It should be illegal. That's generally, I mean, I have my qualms with music education. Like if I taught at Juilliard, obviously. You could have a great student and say, man, wow, you're like a pro, and I think you're great. You need an opportunity, and there's no opportunity. So how do you feel as a teacher, or all of the great musicians we know who go into teaching, because there are no gigs?
Mm-hmm.
because to subsidize survival, because you can't work enough gigs to be able to live, especially in New York City or Los
I don't know how
Angeles.
people do it. I feel so blessed to have steady work. I mean, I really, I think about the young people coming up, like, what are they going to do? You know,
I
think
talked
about
to
it.
a young saxophonist here in Detroit who's exceptional, and I don't know if you know him, but you should meet him. Um, he sincerely, we had a really sincere, deep conversation, and for him, the reality is like he's how can I say resigned the fact that he won't be able to sustain himself as a musician, like only. So he works like another job, like where he's like an arborist.
Right?
Like he does
Yeah.
something else because he's realized it's like this is not even realistic for me to even work up to be a musician, and he's deserving of it. Like he plays on a level and he can play. Like, and for us to say someone can play, that's
That's
saying
great.
that you could play. You know what I mean? Like if I said, "Hey man, could this guy do this?" You'd be like, "Yeah, he could do it." You know, could he do this job? Can he read? Does he have a sound? Does he have a personality? Like all of these elements that make you a real artist or a musician. Yeah, but it's like, okay,
That's the thing. It's like if you bring that kind of passion and love to what you do, you have the ability, like this guy obviously has. But if people can recognize that you love what you do and that they want you around, then you will get work. So it's also about following that passion and not giving up. Like I really, if you have it, like it's hard to know sometimes. Like an actor, will be waiting tables until they're 45, and then finally they're like, I just better do something else because I'm never getting the role that I want. But for musicians, it's a little different because there's more opportunities than for actors, I think, in terms of commercial things that you can do, right? I don't know.
well, I mean, at this stage of the game, I don't know if I can agree with that. I mean, the thing
Right.
is, there's two problems. I mean, and I want you to go into them, but I sum them up as this: there's people don't pay for music. One,
Right. They don't want to.
well, no, people they really don't. Like if you think about it, like the consumption, like the cost of what it is okay. So people don't pay, and number two, people don't listen to music.
Well, here's the thing. People listen to some music, but the problem is we've got services like Spotify and all that. It allows people not to pay for music. So we're training people for a generation, we're almost training people that they can listen to music without paying for it. And that's
Well,
tough.
exactly. So when I say they don't listen to it, is because the way the human mind works, and there's studies on this, obviously. If you pay for something and it's at a premium price, it has value to you. It's attached to value. So
That's
if
right.
it's valuable, then you're going to actually listen to because you paid for this thing.
Right.
That now just like, well, I'm damn sure I paid $50 for this song. So
Right.
I'm going to listen to this song, whether
Listen to
I
the
like
heck
it or
out of
not,
it.
and I'm going to want to like it because I paid $50 for it. So your
Right.
level of listening is tied to a value system. So now music is playing nonstop, so people hear it, but they're not listening.
Right. And you can take it for granted because it's you can
Plus,
listen to it or not listen to it. It doesn't change anything for you. You don't pay it.
we've both been on gigs, you and I both, on the same bandstand together, and the music was on a super high level of quality, and we're playing, and no one's listening to us.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Wait, a star or celebrity gets on the bandstand, and then all of a sudden, everyone's paying attention, but the quality of the music has dropped. By we did a gig for Seth MacFarlane. Do you remember this? Or no, maybe you weren't on the gig. It was
I on that one, but I remember hearing
no,
about it.
It was Charles.
Okay.
Charles called, and this is something that happened.
Yeah.
So this is all I'm saying is how people's thought process of what value is, or it could be with Jazz Lincoln Center, and a big name is not there, so then people just tune out. However, the music might be on the highest level it's ever been on, but it's attached to something else, not the actual content. So,
Right. Well, that's why we have to train people somehow to understand how to be engaged in the music and I mean, that's why there's like what you're doing with people. Maybe people who see this are not necessarily advanced musicians who are watching, because you're wanting to present this to a different group of people. But I think that if we can educate people to understand how to listen to this, I mean, that's a really important thing, like how to listen to this music. And I like what you're doing and what you're talking about. And unfortunately, I have to do this video thing soon, so I have to jump off, man. But
No, no, this is great. Any last words you want to share with?
oh man, I hope for everybody who's home right now because of the corona thing and kind of feeling stuck, this is a great opportunity to explore a lot of different things. I mean, it may feel like, you know, we still have all our responsibilities. A lot of people are working from home, but I think it's a good time to reflect on everything and reevaluate things that are important to us, and take some time to explore things that you haven't, because maybe you'll open yourself up to some new things, and continue to bring this new energy that we find in this time to the future. And I think things are going to be different. I think technology, the way we've all adapted, we're using things now that we didn't, to perform, to play, to come together. And I think that we can figure out ways to continue to use that. But like what you said earlier, the human experience is absolutely, this is teaching us that we need it more than anything, and more than we probably even understood. So even having this human connection with you right now is important to me, just to be able to stay in touch and connect with somebody that I love. And, you know, thank you for having me do this with you, man.
Man, it's my honor and my pleasure. Thank you, the great Ted Nash. You could see him anywhere. I know it's tednash.com. So you can follow him and get more information about his artistry. And it's a pleasure to be in service to you all. And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you all.
It's
Thank
so
you, audience.
funky.